Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Mondays with Michele video. This week, we'll discuss how to create an index for your document. We'll explore single line, multi-level, and see also types of entries. A good index provides many paths to each piece of information, anticipating the search terms your readers will use. Let's get started. What I thought I would talk about today is creating index in a Word document. And even though this is specific to Microsoft Word, other word processing programs will use a similar method. And the information I give you in terms of other considerations when you are creating an index will absolutely apply no matter what tools you are using. So let's start by just looking at the basics of how to mark up your document to automatically find your index entries. And let me just turn these markers off for the moment. So what a lot of people do to start with is index your headings. And certainly you do want your main headings, your main topics to appear in the index, but that's not the only thing you want to appear. But what you can do is highlight the words, go to the References tab up top, and we see this area marked Index, and we have a Mark Entry icon. And if I click that Mark Entry icon, it pulls up this dialog box. And you'll notice it's giving me some information. It says the main entry is going to say main menu. It's going to list the page number. And if I click mark, it's created this weird looking code. And these curly brackets are containing the code for that index entry. So XE tells the computer this is an index entry. The part within quotes is what's actually going to appear in the index. And I could change that if I want. I could type either change it in this dialog box, or I could go right in here because it's just editable text, and I could say my main. And once we have created an index entry, you notice that dialog box stayed open just to make it easy for you to go find the next index entry. So if I selected the words family tree, nothing's appearing in the dialog box yet. I have to click back in the dialog box, and now it is showing whatever I had highlighted. So I could go, okay, I'll mark this one. And there is my entry. And I could do the same thing, click back in my document, select the word search. I have to click back on the dialog box to refresh it so that it's now showing the word search. Now we've been marking these one at a time, but there is also a mark all button. And what mark all will do is index every occurrence of that word. So if I click this, what we will find is it will have indexed these other references to the word search. So we have all of these others. Now, The problem with Mark All, it will only index something that exactly matches what you selected. So what that means is if I have the word search in lowercase somewhere in this document, it's not going to find it. So you do have to be aware that when you do the Mark All, it is looking for an exact match. Now, if I was to create an index, and I'll show you that process in a moment, but I'm just going to flip to my other document so that you can see what the index looks like. So this type of entry is what we have been coding. We have a single line with the page number. But you notice I've also got a bunch of entries coded that are a hierarchical structure. So I've got a topic, family history library menu, but with subtopics of learning resources and library services. So if we go back to our original document and we want to take a look at how we would code that, I'm going to this time just click at the end of this line so you can see my cursor flashing. I'm going to go to this mark index entry, but I'm going to manually type in my search term. So I'm going to call the main topic menus. My sub entry will be the search menu. And I'm going to click mark. And it has created something that is very similar, but you'll notice the way it sets up the entries, your top level is the first word and a colon is used to separate it from the subtopics. So you don't have to worry about the coding if you just want to use this dialog box, and the computer creates the information for you. The other thing I could do is, again, if I just click at the end, I've got to think about how someone is actually going to use this index. So instead of looking at the term search, maybe they would be checking the words looking up. So you might want to have an entry in the L's that says looking up, but then I would point them to the correct term, which is C search. And I'm going to mark that. So I've now created for this one word, I've created a straightforward entry in the index that will say search, and it'll reference this page 1. I've created a 2-level entry that says menus and then search menu underneath it with page 1 as a reference. And I've also created an entry in the L section of the index that says looking up, see search. So when you are creating an index, it is much more than just indexing your main headings. That's what the table of contents is for. The challenge with an index is to be looking within the text to see what other options, what other features can you pull out. And that can get very labor intensive. It also can really junk up your document because you notice how busy the document starts to look with all of these strange XE codes. It's one reason why when you're creating an index, it's recommended that this is the very last step you do, because you don't want to have to start editing your document after you've put these index codes in, because if you're not careful, it's really easy to accidentally delete some of them. And that's why when I'm editing a document, I generally work with these paragraph markers turned on so that you can see these backward P's, because it will show me if there's any of these hidden codes. If I turn that paragraph marker off, it's hiding all those index entries, which you might think is fine. However, if I was to say, oh, I don't like search, I'm going to change that heading and I'm going to call it searching. If I turn the markers back on, I just erased all of my index entries. If I was working with the paragraph markers turned on, I could then change my heading to searching and go in and make those same changes in the codes and not have to redo all the index entries. So some of this is very much a timing thing as to when it makes sense to do some of these different functions. And your index is generally best done at the very, very end. You can also copy and paste index entries. So if I wanted to, for some reason, put that exact same entry right after these words, I've copied it, I can just paste it in, because it is a chunk of code, just a very weird looking chunk of code. So now that you have created these index entries, we would go to the end of the document, type in our heading of index, and click where we want the index entries to appear. We would then go back to that References tab, and we would click, instead of the Mark Entry, we would click Insert Index. And we will see this index dialog box. And we have some choices here. So this is showing us a preview of what it will look like if I just leave it as From Template. And I can either have the entries, the sub-entries, indented, or if I click Run In, do you see how it's basically doing it more as the idea of a paragraph? So all of these subtopics are just kind of crammed together. I personally prefer the indented style, but you also have other styles of index. So there is what they call the classic style, which has the letter of the alphabet for that section of the index and your indenting. There is what they call fancy, so you almost have this banner effect. There is modern, which is similar to the classic, except it has a separator line. I find that's great if you have an index that is quite lengthy. If you have an index that is only a few pages, I find those separator bars can be quite distracting. Or you can have what they call their bulleted ones. So in this case, the letter of the alphabet is not quite left aligned. It's indented a bit, and you can decide, do you want 2 columns? You might find you can do 3 columns. But if I now click OK, it has generated the index for me, and we can see the different kinds of entries. So in this case, let me just push this to a new column. I've got so few entries, it's not allowing you to easily see column break. Here is our M's. We've got menus and we've got search menu as the item underneath it. Here is the what I call the see also entry, where we put in a new term. Looking up, we thought maybe people would be checking under the L's if they wanted to search for something. So we put looking up, see, search. So we're redirecting them to the preferred term that we are using with all of the page references. And I will show you the document that I did a lot more extensive indexing on. But one thing you have to watch if you want to update your document and add more items. So for example, if I go in and decide to index the term family search, since this whole presentation was on family search, we know there's going to be an awful lot of references. I can't use mark all unless I've actually highlighted the entry, and then it will search for that entry everywhere. So I've now marked all of the references to the word family search. And if I go to the end here, you notice it's not showing up in the index. I have to update my index. So the easiest way to do that, if I update field, now it's appeared. Or I could do update index up top is the other way of updating it. And it's now picking up all of those references for family search. One thing to note though, if we look at searching the records, searching the catalog, the page numbers right now are page 4 and page 7. If I turn the paragraph markers off and I go back in and update the index, do you notice the page numbers just changed? And that's because if I scroll back down to page 5. If I look at what's happening with the coding, what can happen? Those codes take up a lot of space. And if you are doing a lot of indexing, which is ideal for a large document, it's going to push some of your text to the next page. Now, it won't affect the final printout because these are all hidden codes. But if you are generating your index with these paragraph marks turned on so that you can see the codes, it's using the page numbers at that moment in time. So what's really important is you need to turn the paragraph markers off so the document is looking exactly the way you want. In other words, those codes that take up space are hidden, and then go in and update your index so that the page numbers referenced match the physical document. The only other thing I wish is that they would have the option that this index is a clickable hyperlinked index. That would be incredibly helpful if you're creating online documents. They do it for table of contents, Microsoft Word does not have the option to do that for the index. So in my mind, that's really the only failing. So again, the steps that I've shown you and the logic of how to create your index and how you have to think through what other terms people might want to look up information, that applies to whatever product you're using, because it's how you make your index really useful. Because if you think about it, if I'm writing a document about my Renton family, and I have 5 John Rentons, it's not going to be too useful if the only entry in the index is John Renton or Renton, John. If there are 5 of them, I'm probably going to want to use this hierarchical kind of a structure to say John Renton, and then maybe I'll identify them by wife Mary Smith. And then the next entry might be wife Joan Foster, so that somebody who's looking up information can tell which John Renton is on which page. Otherwise, they might have to look through 20 different page numbers to find the correct entry. So a lot of this comes down to how you want to set it up to make it easy for people to find the information. I hope you enjoyed this week's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.